really jump into some neat things and let you have a chance to get to know Darren as we have been getting to know him at SGR. So welcome. Good to see you, Leanne from Milton Freewater, and hello, Lucia from Houston. And I know we've got folks coming in from all over the place. There's some folks from Addison. So as we're getting started, if you have a question, feel free to use the chat feature or the Q&A to post it, and we will get to as many as we can. Let's jump in. Darren, welcome not only to SGR, but to the Wednesday webinar edition. And really glad to have you. Appreciate you taking time to be on this. I know you have lots going on. So let's kind of jump in. What first impressions of SGR and AFI after about a month on the job?
Well, it's not quite a month, Mike. I think it's about 3 weeks, little 3.5 weeks. Man, it's so good to be here, and it's good to see your face, Mike, and folks who are joining. It's a privilege to be here. I'm super excited for the conversation. I would say, to no surprise, what I've learned is the passion and the commitment and the dedication to public service in cities and counties throughout the country, and special districts as well. I've been away from local government for about 3.5 years. You know that. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But when my wife and I finally, when Ron Holofield and I were talking and said, let's go to SGR, I just miss local government. Deb's response was, I told you so. So, Mike, I think it's just about being around people who just, are doing the hard work of local government. And, as Ron Holofield talks about, the heroes in this space, it's amazing. And I've had so much opportunity to reconnect in this very short term. And man, I am so excited to be back. So looking forward to the conversation as well, Mike. And let me just say to you, since, this is your show. You've been doing this since COVID, minus a few weeks here and there. I really appreciate you doing this. I appreciate being a colleague with you. You've been doing heavy lifting for leadership development, servant leadership for many years. It's deep, deep in your core. And I know there's a lot of leaders that have benefited throughout the United States. So I'll just recognize you as genuinely as I can. Super excited to be able to do this today and just work with you at a different level.
Well, thank you, Darren. And it's funny because we share a common history with the great city of Fort Collins.
That's right.
I was moving not long after you went to work there. So I didn't really know you when I was in Fort Collins. But when I got into this space, I began hearing a lot about Darren Atterbury and what a great thing was happening in Fort Collins. And of course, I knew that as a resident of the city. I don't think you use this title anymore, but we used to call it the Choice City. And it really was it is one of the choice cities around. And we loved our time in Fort Collins. Tell us a little bit about your career that led to you becoming the city manager of Fort Collins.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for those comments about Fort Collins. I still live in Fort Collins and as you know, spending a little bit of time in Texas these days. And by the way, Mike and I have a battle between Grapevine, Texas and Fort Collins, Colorado. I'll bring it up. Just bring it up at that point. We also have a couple of other things that we talk about often, the Denver Broncos and the Las Vegas Raiders, which I've always seen as the Oakland Raiders. But so we have all kinds of fun little spats, Mike and I, about some of these things. But I have a deep love for Fort Collins. So I grew up in Northern California in Sonoma County, and my grandparents had a dairy farm, and I grew up on a dairy farm, and I had an uncle, my Uncle Wayne, who maybe I'll talk about a little bit later, who was a city planner and urban design type. And so as a little boy, when he was on break from colleges, and he worked for the city of Petaluma, California for a while as a city planner, he was a great mentor. He was a great uncle. He was a city planner who I had interest in architecture and urban design. And so he'd take me around the city and we'd draw pictures of skyscrapers. And, when you're a little boy riding BART in the under the ocean in the Bay Area, in a tunnel, that's pretty cool.
Mhm.
And so, I got sort of excited about cities, about architecture, about sort of the infrastructure. I know that sounds kind of geeky, Mike, particularly for a boy that sort of grows up on, near his grandparents' dairy farm.
Mm.
Um, but he really is who got me into the space. So I studied city planning at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and then married my best friend Deborah from high school, and we moved to Atlanta, Georgia, to study at Georgia Tech. So I'm a Ramblin' Wreck. So I went and studied city planning and civil engineering there, and that was, in hindsight, as a reflect, that was really my commitment to the systems side of the house, the back office infrastructure, public works, transportation, things like that. I've been able to work in a shout out to Pismo Beach, California, Santa Rosa, California, MARTA, the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority in Atlanta. I did my graduate thesis there, and then I was in Vancouver, Washington for about 5 years, and then I moved to Fort Collins in 1996 to be the assistant city manager. Did that for 9 years, and then was the city manager for about 18 years
Yeah.
and then left after a 35-year career in local government to go to become a bank market president or credit union market president in Northern Colorado. Did that for 3.5 years. We'll probably talk a little bit about that and maybe how that experience might shape, my experience or my work at SGR and AFI. But and then came back home
Right.
to SGR and AFI. So that in a nutshell is it. So dairy farm to big cities, smaller cities to SGR.
Well, that really helps me understand why you were so successful in Fort Collins because, Fort Collins is kind of the where ag and high
Yeah,
tech meet.
that's
There's a
right.
strong agriculture element to Fort Collins. And listen, I know nobody works harder than dairy farmers. Farmers work really hard. Nobody works harder
Yeah,
than dairy farmers. So that obviously gave you a great work ethic and helped you
yeah.
be successful in so many ways. So you mentioned Deb, your wife, that you were high school sweethearts, but tell us a little bit more about your family as a whole.
Yeah. So I grew up in Northern California, so that's where most of my family is. My mom is in the Sacramento area and sister, and my brother is down in Southern California. And then, as I said, we've been, when we were in the Portland, Vancouver area, we had always intended to get down back to California, back to the Bay Area. And honestly, Mike, Colorado, and this is maybe a bit of an insight for young managers too, who, oftentimes we were told it's always go to the bigger job, the bigger city. You just go from assistant to deputy or vice versa, and then you go become a city manager. And we're seeing that trend change a little bit. Um, my wife always had an attitude about if we have to leave Fort Collins, I'm all in. Let's leave. But if we don't have to leave, why would we leave? And this was a place that we raised our kids. Two of our kids were born in the Portland area, Vancouver, Washington, and Portland, Oregon. And then we have a son who was born here in Fort Collins. And then Deb and I have a fourth child named Tim who is adopted, and he's Chinese. And we adopted him about 15 years ago, and he's a 20-year-old. So right now I have a 32-year-old, I have a 30, almost 30-year-old, a 26-year-old, and a 20-year-old. And for people on the call who know me, know that my family is a huge part of who I am. What matters in my life. And also, I tend to pull a lot of stories as part of my leadership journey. I tend to pull a lot of stories from my family. They've been fabulous in so many different ways. I'll tell you, Mike, too, you've been in big leadership roles. Um, I just the support system that I have from my wife and from my mom and my sister and brother and family, but also my kids. There were times where, I mean, I had one of my kids' teachers said, he read in the newspaper one morning that how much money I made as a city manager, what my salary was. And he came to the class and he told the student, my son's class, that Jake's dad made too much money. I
Oh,
mean, who does that, right?
yeah.
Um, and so, that led to a great conversation with both our son and with the teacher. But, those are the kinds of things sometimes that kids of public leaders and spouses and partners and so forth deal with. And so I'm not immune from that. I do have a little bit of scar tissue. Mike, I will tell you, I'm one of those guys that just loves this stuff. Never a single day in my 35-year career did I sit there and think, what should I do today? I had bad outings. I had bad council meetings. I had, rough performance evaluation conversations. But at the end of the day, I am one of those people who deeply love this work. I'm going to do my best with guys like you and team members on SGR and AFI to really highlight leaders that have, that it's tough
Yeah.
and try and help equip them to do great work. Um, for me, my career has been incredible. You mentioned we talked about Fort Collins, and then I'll stop here. One of the things that I really loved about Fort Collins is no one ever said to stop thinking big.
Mhm.
Everyone gave, we had built over a long period of time a trusting relationship with our community and with our elected officials. Um, and I understand there are some communities that are in a lot tougher shape. I mean, even in our neighborhood here in northern Colorado, there's some cities that have really struggled for generations. Um, uh, I worked with 40 council members and 6 mayors in Fort Collins alone, and some of those people are lifelong, really good friends. Some of them I see and were, great to reconnect. There's really only two that I don't ever want to work with again. Those are good
Pretty good
odds.
record. I will just say that's a pretty good track
It
record.
is, but I'm going to tell you, I realize that that's not everywhere. And so I think, Mike, the work that you and our other colleagues are doing at SGR and AFI to really help those folks who are not in that kind of situation, to help equip, to help empower, to help strategize on maybe how to be more effective, um, and maybe sometimes to acknowledge it's not the best fit.
Yeah.
And so that feels like really important work to me, and I'm super excited about it.
You reminded me of a couple of things. I remember reading in a book a number of years ago where the author said that he aspired to live so that those who knew him best loved him most. And
Mm.
that stuck with me as a real hallmark of authentic leadership. And I hear that in you that, we have
Mhm.
to do a lot of things that are public and so
Yeah,
forth, but we really want to live so that the people who know us best love us
I love
most.
that. I love that.
And I see that in you. And, when
Thank
I
you.
came to work for Ron at SGR, one of the things he said is, you're going to discover that there's a noble spirit in public service.
Mm.
And at
Yeah,
the
that is
time I
for
thought,
sure.
yeah, but later I came back to him and said, you didn't state it powerfully enough. You
Yeah,
understated it. It's really true. And so it is a great opportunity we have to help equip men and women in this
yeah,
high calling because it is hard and they are all constantly under the spotlight
mm,
and unfairly criticized and
yeah,
so forth. And yet they do what they do and the rest of us all benefit from it. And
yeah,
that's amazing to me.
yeah. Thank you for that, Mike. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say my Ron Holofield understated anything. So,
Doesn't often, let me tell you.
that let me, I mean, I'm going to tell you too, um, what an amazing impact that man has had on our industry. He's not done yet. He's got a lot of work. He is a high performing individual. I love him. You're part of the reason why I came to SGR, Mike. Ron's part of the reason. Austin and the whole team, Wendell, and on and on and on and on. I can't list all the people that are on the team either, or are doing, out hitting the streets doing recruitments too, or the AFI team. I mean, I was on the AFI board for a long time. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about it. It was a highlight of my career early on as assistant city manager to be associated with AFI. And I'm not kidding. I got to meet the cities that were doing cool stuff, the city leaders, and I got to bring that back to Fort Collins.
Mhm.
And we didn't even have to steal it. They were giving it to us.
Right.
And but my career has been full of people who have been so generous. And again, I'm not naive. There's scar tissue and there's hurt as well. Um, like really bad. I had a pretty optimal situation, but there's some stuff that we just need to rally around our colleagues and like, forgive me, but just sort of hug on them and professionally and figure out how to help them. That really matters. And for the folks who are, just in an optimal situation, like continue to help them and equip. So
Yeah.
it's good stuff.
It there's a high calling, and it does seem to me that so often the case is when you have great pain, that if you allow that to make you better rather
Yeah.
than bitter, and maybe there's a little
Ooh,
mixture of those two things,
yes.
that some of your greatest work then comes out of that pain. I could point to some
Yeah.
facilitators in our team who had really tough careers,
Yeah.
but they leveraged that to really help a lot of places.
Yeah.
And so you moved from city of Fort Collins, city manager, went to work for a credit union. I know you enjoyed that. And what are some lessons that you sort of learned maybe from that experience
Oh.
you think we could benefit from in local government?
Yeah. Well, we have 3 hours for this conversation, right, Mike? I know we don't. And boy, a few years ago, you and Ron asked me to come to, I think it was a TLG conference and talk
Yes.
about what it like in the last year, what were lessons learned going from local government to private business. And Mike, you'll remember I shared 4 key points. One is governance is very different.
Yeah.
And I'll just leave it there, right? It's very, very different. Two was there was, what I call a production mindset. Like we're there, we need to produce to be successful. A for-profit business has to, they have to make money to stay in business. And as costs are going up, they really can't be flat. They have to at least cover their costs and then some. And so this idea of we have to produce, um, to be successful was something that was, we don't really use that language in local government.
Mhm.
There's a lot of people that are producing very direct services, but we don't use that language. And then I would talk, I talked about what I call product pricing and service. At the credit union, we were very intentional about the products that we rolled out, what we priced them at, and what service levels did we provide. And I didn't have a lot of exposure about that. There's different language for local government, but um, we were very intentional about what products we rolled out. In a competitive environment, if people didn't find those products attractive, then we wouldn't sell them, and they would just be a cost for us. The price of the unit of the products were really important, and then also service. Was it world class service? Was it, hey, just basic sort of contact center kinds of stuff? So I learned a lot in that space, and then finally, what I talked about at TLG was risk and reward.
Mhm.
But the risk in the private sector, even though as city managers, I felt like we had pretty risky jobs and deputies and assistants and police chiefs and CFOs and others. Um, in this environment, great culture. It wasn't a sell, sell, sell environment. It was actually world-class culture, frankly, Elevation's credit union. And by that, I'll also say, a shout out to City of Fort Collins too. I think City of Fort Collins and Elevations both were very high performing, great cultures. And that started a long, long time ago with the leadership that we inherited decades and decades ago. The city is 150 years old. The credit union was 70 years old. It wasn't just about those of us that were in current time leaders. But I would say, Mike, those are sort of some things that I learned. I would say now, decoding all that for local government, I think clarity of purpose.
Hmm.
We tend to kind of want to do everything for everyone. What I've learned through hanging out with private business over the last few years is trying to be very intentional about who we are and go after that and do that really, really well. I was a big advocate in Fort Collins for what I called the stop doing list. Like, what
Hmm.
are those things that we've done for 50, 70, maybe 100 years? If they don't add value and there's so many other priorities, then we have to have the conversation about, do we stop doing that? And I think sometimes um, either the political backdrop isn't there, or the courage isn't there, um, or the context where we can have real conversations about priorities. I think that's really, really important. And then what I sort of saw in business as well, not just at the credit union, but other businesses that I was working with, was focus is so important. Um, and I know that's, stating the obvious, Mike, but really what you focus on is going to get done. It's not about just saying it. You have to resource it. And then you have to put systems in place that ensure that you're tracking and you're watching your progress, and is it moving the needle? And we always said at the city, it's like we want to move the needle up and to the right. Now that doesn't mean profit and all that for cities, obviously. But so in a nutshell, I think there's a lot of transferable sort of knowledge and experience. I kind of wish I had had my private sector experience before I had been a city manager. I don't think, for those who know me as well, I don't think I would be a different leader. um, Eyes and ears, more eyes and ears, the better, in my opinion. Be more expedient about how we get to decisions. Um, I learned a lot. I learned a lot, and I wish I had had. What I'd love to see now would be sabbaticals where public leaders could spend time in private business and
Hmm.
then come back.
Back, yeah.
I know that's nearly impossible, but so Mike, maybe at SGR and AFI, um, we ought to kind of dig in and probe and be more intentional about some of that knowledge, that someone doesn't have to go do a sabbatical. Maybe we can help sort of equip teams with some of that thinking.
Yeah, that's a great thought. Several years ago, the city of Plano did it wasn't a sabbatical, but it was kind of a loan an employee to another city for a period of time. And Plano paid part of that salary for that. That person took some expertise to this other
Yeah,
city, but also gained some experience at another level, and then came back to Plano. Uh, AFI and SGR, maybe we could be involved in helping that facilitate that kind of thing, and even maybe with private business. So, you
I
know,
love it.
all these years Ron has just kind of held us back with not thinking big enough, and now we can think bigger.
There we go.
That's
That's what I wanted to hear.
right,
Hey,
right.
you know what, Mike? Since you mentioned Plano, Mark and Plano and that team
It's
they
awesome.
are rock stars, man.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to learn, some great practices, and one of those organizations for me has been Mark and the team at Plano. I've learned so much from them, and Mark's been just a great leader. And again, it's not only about the leader; it's about the whole team. These cities that we're building, we're co-creating, and I'd like to say it's we all have a different role. One role isn't more important than another. One may have more formal authority. One may be in the newspaper more, but at the end of the day, we all have a role, and if we're all co-creating and working in alignment, and by the way, that took us years and years and years. I don't mean to be flip about how hard that is. But when you are aligned, you're clear about your vision, and you've got systems in place, you know when you're in your sweet spot.
Right.
And by the way, since I'm on the topic, Mike, I think I'd like to see I'd like to see AFI and SGR, and frankly, our industry highlight those best practices more, and those leaders and those cities. And so, I think we'll be spending time on that as well. I always had the cities that I and the leaders that I knew I could look up to and that I could go to. For me, some of those historically are Bob O'Neill, who was at ICMA.
Mhm.
Bob and I got to be on the board, the AFI board with Bob. I think about Jim Keene in Palo Alto and Peggy Maris in Decatur, Georgia, and Bill Horn in Florida, in I think Clearwater, I think. On and on and on and on. I think we could list some of those, for me, people who were real mentors and real encouragers to kind of build the best four columns that we could at the time. And uh, back to Mark. I hold Mark up in that space.
Yeah, yeah, Mark Israelson and so many in Plano
Yeah,
too. Like you mentioned, it's not a one moment thing. We build on and stand on each other's shoulders,
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
for sure. So I can just love, I love, this timeline. Great career, culminated in being a city manager in Fort Collins, a great experience in the private sector, and now at SGR, which we are the private sector, but we really only work with local governments.
yeah,
Just your ability as a CEO to draw on all these things as we continue to serve and help local governments be more successful is really exciting to me. You've talked some about scenario planning and signal monitoring was something you saw at the credit union.
yeah.
And we're talking about that some related to SGR, but relate that a little bit for local governments because I think
Yeah.
it's fascinating.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think with the backdrop of all the different tensions that we're seeing and all the different opportunities, I wrote down a few things with. I know what managers and cities are dealing with right now. Mike, I've committed to meeting with 100 city managers and around the country between now and the end of May. I'm about 15 into it, so those 15 that have helped me, thank you. If you're on this call and you'd like to chat, I got a list, but I would love to talk with you about what are you seeing as the meta trends in our industry? What are you struggling with? What do you get goosebumps about, excited about? So here's what I know, Mike. I know that, and I'll get to scenario planning in 1 second. I'm not lost the time here. I'll wrap it up
Right.
quickly.
We're good.
Um, I know that AI is really, really important. I know that some cities are connected and doing good work. Some cities don't really know what to do yet, and some are really sort of at the early stages. We know that there are innovative companies out there that are trying to break in with local government and to really provide solutions through AI and through technology. And we know that there are cities that want to do that and want to pilot that, but they don't know how to get together. I think that, and we think that AFI is the perfect portal for those two to come together. Um, so I think AI. We know that civic discourse is really, really at the center of many of our local council chambers. We're seeing a lack of civility, not in some places, not at all. They're not seeing it. But in many, many places, they're seeing just a level of discourse that's concerning. And so, what managers are telling me is, how do I deal with that? This is so unique and so different than what I've seen in my career. Um, Equipping people to be better at relationships with some of those tricky council members or maybe non-traditional council members. Um, and resource levels and really systems that help us prioritize competing interests, things like priority-based budgeting, budgeting for outcomes, and those sorts of things still are really important. That, by the way, I'll just say in a very apolitical kind of way, in a Doge environment, those cities that are most transparent with their systems and their resources and that are very authentic in how they're engaging in the communities, I think this is an opportunity for those cities to shine. And
Mhm.
I think where that's not been done, I think it's a catalyst to saying, how do we build our systems to get better at that? And then I think I mentioned council relationships. So scenario planning, I recognize it's 31 here. Um, Scenario planning is really looking at our future scenarios for our communities and looking at them in a very genuine way, like a doom and gloom kind of way, and a happy-go-lucky kind of way, and what's between. This isn't a general plan that cities are required to do or comprehensive planning. It's sort of future looking out. What are the likely scenarios or the possible scenarios?
Mhm.
And then, Mike, through signal monitoring teams, how do we engage our workforce, our team members, to watch certain signals that might lead us to particular scenarios? And so, Halson, who's on our AFI team, who's amazing, I
Mhm.
love the guy. Um, he and I have been talking about signal monitoring and scenario planning, and how does that become part of our offerings at AFI. So to me, that's kind of a teaser. So I'll
Yeah.
leave it there.
I love that because Darren, I think as we do a lot of strategic visioning retreats and work with elected bodies and governing boards, being able to be a little more proficient in scenario planning and signal monitoring really, I think, brings value to what we do and is very helpful for cities. I often say that you have to have success, you have to have a long walk in the same direction. But you
Yeah,
have to have the right
right.
direction too.
Yeah,
So we have to
absolutely.
draw on things like the work of our strategic foresight team and House and Lay and what's going on at
Yeah,
FI in order to help cities know here's where we are, here's where we need to go, and then how you get there.
yeah.
That
Like
those things have to be in the right order.
you're right, Mike. And timing matters, and relationships matter, and competencies matter. And sometimes we got caught up, spun up in some tricky space, and that's where we've got to figure out how to carefully, delicately navigate out of that. To your point, it really is the journey. It's not just sort of the one-off success. But how do you take those sort of one-off successes to turn them into a body of work? Um, I know we have to wrap up. I just want to say, sometimes I don't want to come off as Pollyanna and sort of a naive optimist, right? In this stuff, it's hard work and it's beautiful work. It's look, I have scar tissue as well. Um, and I also have this aspirational vision for cities that why would we aspire to average? Why
Yeah,
as leaders would we aspire to average? Mike, you and I have talked about, even with our marriages, we don't aspire to be average at that. And I know that can get goofy and really hard for people, but um, what about if we're just trying to continuously improve? If we're starting from here trying to go to here, or if we're starting from here trying to go, um, so it's not really a destination. It's really about trying to improve um, American cities.
yeah, yeah,
And the crazy thing is, this is not Pollyanna. It's really, really important work. And I'm going to say this as my final comment. The collection of team members, when I sat with the all SGR AFI team, Mike, in Grapevine, Texas, your favorite place on the planet,
yeah.
um,
Greatest city in the world.
greatest city in the world, right behind Fort Collins, Colorado. Um, but let me say that the collection of people at SGR and AFI, Mike, I've been around a lot of amazing leaders and people who like will bleed for local government and help equip and support. Man, I'll tell you what, the collection of folks on our team, I'm not just saying this, is gives me so much passion. And and these are a lot of people that are deeply committed to this industry. And so anyway, this isn't Pollyanna. I'm informed, and I want to be useful. And I know you do, and I know our colleagues do. So I'm excited.
Well,
Um,
yeah, we want to welcome you. We're so glad you're here. I've really hoped that this would come about just like this, and want you to know that we all recognize and celebrate the value you're bringing to an already great company, following in the shoes of a great leader in Ron Hollifield. And yet, we feel like the future is very bright for SGR and AFI with you at the helm. And so
Thank
we'll
you.
have to have you back and talk some more because there's a lot of great things. I'd love to have a time maybe when we can have you talk about, as a city manager, some of the strategies you had and things
Yeah,
you did to work with council members,
yeah,
because
yeah.
that's a real
Great.
pain point for a lot of people. And
Yeah.
we had some questions about it. We couldn't get into them today, but we'll try again at another time. And
Uh,
thanks so much for your career, Darren, and for the service you've given to local government, and now giving in an even bigger way. And we really are glad to be partners now in this great cause.
you are kind, Mike. Thank you.
Well, thanks for being with us, everyone. Thanks to Lisa Shook, who's behind the scenes making everything happen. And I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation with Darren, and that you will reach out to us if there's anything we can do to help you be more successful. And, Darren mentioned a couple of times about pain, and I know that's true. I've talked to so many people that that's the case. And here's what I always try to come back to say: don't let what is not perfect ruin what is. And no matter what you're saying, there's going to be some things that aren't perfect, and there's going to be pain. But don't forget that what you're doing is really, really wonderful. And if you weren't doing it, all the rest of us would be the lesser for it. So thank you for what you're doing. Hang in there. Have a great week.